Hello, welcome to my TED Talk. My name is Cady, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how desperately the U.S. needs to upgrade our economic immigration system. What can we really do to make America great? So, immigration has been in the news a lot lately, between the disaster that was family separation, attempts and promises to build a wall, and the threat of undocumented immigrant caravans flooding into our country. It's undeniable that much of the population sees undocumented immigration as a huge crisis and the biggest flaw in our immigration system. So this graph shows the media mentions per 100,000 news articles of different terms for undocumented immigrants. So you can see a clear rise in media attention on the issue. But when you compare that to the actual number of undocumented immigrants coming into the country, that's just for scale, the perception of the issue as a crisis doesn't match what's actually happening. So where you have this peak in 2010, you have a trough over there. So there's a bit of definitely it's distorted. So what's getting lost in this emotional debate is the economic benefits of immigration. Despite making up 13% of the US population, immigrants have founded, and their children have founded almost half of Fortune 500 companies. In 2012, immigrant-founded engineering and technology firms employed approximately 560,000 people and generated $63 billion in sales. In 2014, remember, immigrants are 13% of the population, but they started 28.5% of all new businesses. So how do we attract and capitalize on this economic potential? Currently, only 9% down there of all total US immigration is work-based. The biggest complaint commonly heard about immigration is that immigrants are coming in to steal jobs, but is that really true? I don't think so. It's worth talking about though, because the current administration has a GDP growth goal of 4%, which is pretty aggressive considering that GDP growth annually has averaged between 1.5 and 2.5% since the recession. It's also aggressive considering that the national unemployment rate is at 3.7%, which is the lowest it's been since 1969. So we don't have a workforce to drive the kind of growth that they're shooting for. We need to import it. That's basically the moral, which is why we need to talk about economic immigration. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking to you about why economic immigration is important and kind of how it fits into the greater sphere of immigration, because that's a huge topic. And I mean, you could write 500-page papers on it, and they have whole teams of people in Washington doing varying amounts on it. I'm going to talk about the current system and kind of how our tier economic system works. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is what lessons we can learn from other countries and implement in our system and context. It is my hypothesis that in developed nations, economic migration policy can be designed to grow the economy by filling specific gaps in the workforce. And when applied properly, economic migration policy drives growth in a way that is consistent with the interests of the businesses, government, citizens, and immigrants in a nation. So everybody wins. To quickly clarify, there are 5 reasons that people immigrate, or 5 types of immigration. The first is humanitarian. So most developed nations, I would say, have humanitarian immigration programs, which is to aid asylum seekers and refugees. The second type is family immigration, which seeks to reunite family members with their permanent resident or naturalized citizens in their country. The fourth type is free movement, which exists within free trade areas like the EU and the British Commonwealth. So immigrants can move around in there kind of without as many restrictions, kind of like goods can, but it's usually temporary. And then the fourth type is temporary migration, which usually applies to guest workers and students. And the fifth type, my favorite, obviously, is economic migration. And it's important to note that there are 2 reasons that people allow economic immigrants into their country. The first is that the country wishes to build capacity, so just like sheer number of workers, which is why they let in unskilled labor. The second is the country wishes to bring in skills, such as in technology, minor engineering fields, wherever they see gaps that need filling. So they let in specific skilled labor. Before we can talk about what the US needs to change, we need to understand what we do today. It is my opinion, built on a whole lot of research, that when compared to other developed nations, the current US immigration system is woefully outdated. We have not updated our policy since the 1960s. most of the countries I'm going to be comparing us to today updated in the early 2000s. So just as we found out in the 1920s when we were trying to use policy from the 1800s, like we had to completely reevaluate it, the policy that we're using from the 1960s needs to be completely redone pretty much. So this is what we're looking at right now. So there are 5 tiers that economic immigrants come into the country based on, and they'll have their like specific criteria and kind of where they fit in. And there's 2 things that are important to understand. The first is that we are in the right direction by splitting them into tiers like this, but I don't think, especially this one, using the laser pointer, right there, is specific enough. That is a huge category and doesn't allow us to be strategic in filling economic gaps. The second thing is that we are overly reliant and restricted, actually, by our use of quotas. So, through my research, I found that some of these types of immigration, such as entrepreneurs, are so valuable that we'd be crazy to ever limit how many we want to come into the country. So, for example, entrepreneurs have to bring in $500,000 to $1 million to invest in U.S. businesses. Like, we're trying to drive growth. That's what we want to do. So what would reevaluating this look like? So to quickly clarify before I go into the green bit, quotas here are hard caps on how many immigrants from each category a country lets in. So, and then points-based systems are used to like tally up different desirable qualities in immigrants. And then pass-fail is like meeting a benchmark, so criteria such as how much money they're able to bring in, for example, or like if they have a business plan that meets a country's specifications. But I'll go more into that later on. So, based on the research I've done, it is my recommendation that we do 2 things, which I have listed here. So the first is to split the categories that I mentioned before into these 2. Because they need to be evaluated different ways. Like this one needs to be evaluated on a point system, this 2 years, and then the unskilled needs to be evaluated on a pass-fail basis. And then secondly, we should be using a points-based system for these types on the left, or yeah, your left, because that's what Canada does, and they do it really well. And then a pass-fail system for the ones on the right, and we should not have quotas for them. It is my belief. Okay, so let's take a look at the United Kingdom. First, I want you to draw your attention to the number 35% over there, which is the work-based immigration. So it makes, 35% of their total immigration is work-based, which is compared to 9% in the US, which is like a pretty significant difference, I would say. I mean, that's 4 times as much as the US. So the UK uses a 5-tier system, kind of similar to ours, but the most notable differences are the separation between skilled and unskilled workers, like I talked about, and the extensive use of subcategories. So for example, their entrepreneur category is split into 3 subcategories, and preference is then split based on like how much money you're able to bring in and a couple other things. So the main reason that separating skilled and unskilled workers is important is because that allows a country to adjust how many of each type of worker they bring in based on the needs of the economy. For example, due to an influx of EU immigrants to the UK because of free trade migration, love it, the UK was actually able to adjust their limits for unskilled work from outside the EU and set it to 0 because they did not want to oversaturate an already like flooded workforce. So that's kind of a cool thing you can do if you're like flexible targets and differentiating between skilled and unskilled work. There's a lot we can also learn from Canada. If any of you know me, I love Canada because I was born there and because it's pretty cool. So they also have a 36% total work-based immigration down there, which is, 4 times the US. And the Canadian philosophy is that immigration is good for the economy. Unlike the US, it relies on overall flexible targets rather than really strict quotas. Its guiding principle seems to be to welcome all applicants that meet their economic criteria rather than losing that exceptional talent. So a lot of common themes across these countries that I'm talking about actually is a declining native population that needs to be supplemented by economic immigration. So entrepreneurs are allowed into Canada on a pass-fail basis, based on their ability to pursue business ideas with the backing of Canadian investors, which means they need to have a business that meets the specific standards, demonstrate that there's a business group in Canada willing to work with or support their business. They need to meet language requirements and bring enough money into Canada to support themselves. And if they pass that criteria, they're basically allowed into the country because Canada sees them as really valuable to their economy. The second thing that they do is allow skills workers in on a purely points-based system. So Canada, I would say, is the leader in points-based immigration systems. Immigrants submit a profile that translates language ability, education, skills, and experience into points, and the immigrants with the highest score are then allowed to apply for permanent residence. So that's what Canada does. And this change that I'm suggesting is great in theory, and it's really complicated and can seem pretty daunting. But there are countries that are shifting towards these styles that I think are really beneficial and doing it really well. And one of these countries that is currently in this shift is Germany. So Germany is the second most popular migration destination in the world after the United States. And this is interesting because historically Germany has been incredibly anti-immigrant. They have had similar instances earlier on in their history where they're immigrants are taking our jobs, this is a crisis, and it's not been great for them. But since 1999, they've faced this economic dilemma as I mentioned, the declining native population. And those economic demands led to some pretty major changes in the early 2000s. So public policy shifted and several reforms were passed. It was a long process and they went back and forth. Baby steps, right? And German society as a whole has moved towards the Canadian model of cultural inclusion. So another thing they did, which is really cool, is to kind of unite public policy and public opinion, is focus on integration. So integration is how well immigrants fit into society and fit into society is a pretty decent way to say it. But they put services in place for immigrants so that they have the tools to be successful in German society, whether that's learning about German culture or language, and that helped bridge some of the gaps between immigrants and nationals. So integration is really important for kind of moving together. So, if nothing else, I hope you take away from this talk today that, one, the U.S. really does need to reevaluate its attitude towards migration as a whole to keep up with a globalizing world. Because frankly, we're lagging behind, and we're risking losing economic opportunities to other countries with more open policies when we cap it at 40,000 people per category, whatever it is. The second thing is that other countries offer us a really real path towards more strategic and beneficial approaches to immigration, whether that is through points-based systems, pass-fail. And the third thing is that in order for this to work, public opinion and policy need to move towards change together, towards common economic goals, such as facing a declining native population or trying to reach 4%, whatever we decide it is, they need to move together. And in this area of immigration, at least, it shouldn't be controversial. The economic benefits are obvious and we just need to embrace it. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to move into question and answer. Anyone in the audience, if you have questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, and Cady will call on you as she sees fit. And panelists as well, obviously you guys are expected to participate in this. So.
What do you think the economic benefits are of letting, hold on. I need to rephrase my question, come back to me.
Okay.
It just got left behind.
Yeah, so one big critique that I see potentially of this is that bringing in immigrants to take jobs in this society allow employers to keep wages low. right? And like could potentially undermine workers' rights in the U.S. if employers are like, well, I can hire this person from India for less money, so like why would I pay my developers here this higher wage? What is your opinion of that critique, and like what's your response to it?
Right. So the way I would see this working is that, for example, in like points-based, the government could adjust different fields to be worth more points. So like we have a shortage of tech workers, for example. So it would more like even out than like deplete wages. And then, shoot, I had another thing to say about that. So right now, actually, there's like I think 6 million unfilled jobs as of like mid-2018, and the unemployment rate's pretty low. So I think it'd like more restore balance than start to bring things down. So actually bringing in immigrants right now is really costly for companies and requires a lot of paperwork, and it's really slow just because our system as a whole is pretty inefficient and not getting better fast enough. So I actually see it kind of evening out the playing field, if that answers your question. Yeah.
How would you recommend changing all these rules and regulations that America has put on immigration?
If I could answer that, I would be in Congress. Like
Someday.
No, you wouldn't.
yeah, I mean, they have like hundreds of people working on this issue, and if there was one easy answer to just like get on in there, I mean, the best way to do it is to separate it from like people just seeing like the economics of it and just seeing like what it could do to our economy is, I think, the best way to unite us around the money. Okay, Keisha.
I remembered it. What do you think the economic benefits of like illegal immigrants are?
Spicy. Well, so I'm pretty sure illegal immigrant, I mean, I showed you the graph of illegal immigrant rates of people coming into the country, but they're also like leaving the country, so I'm pretty sure that was at 0, or it has been for a while. But I mean, when I think of what stereotypically illegal immigrants do, it's like housekeeping or working in crops and stuff, like that's not jobs that Americans typically want to do. But yeah, then that opens the door for things like exploiting labor rights and stuff like that, and no protections for these workers, which is also a struggle. But I mean, there's so much wrong with how we handle illegal immigration that like, before you can look at economics, you need to think about like, I don't know, giving aid to the countries that illegal immigrants are coming from, and having ways for them to re-enter the country legally after they've been exported. That's a rabbit hole. Yeah, and that's honestly not where my research totally focused. Yeah.
I'm interested in, like, you highlighted Canada's points-based system as a positive. How do you know it's actually positive beyond the theory that it sounds like a good idea?
Mainly because their economy isn't declining.
What are they growing at?
I don't know. But yeah, I see it as like trying to manage like declining population with immigrants. It sounds pretty good in theory. I had a lot on it on my thesis, but I don't remember it all.
But you did see a decline in population, but not increase, or sorry,
Not
a bottoming of
decreasing.
unemployment.
Pardon?
No, you don't see a labor shortage there.
No. What? I don't know.
I mean, so what would be the negative impacts of a declining population if we didn't do anything about it? Let's say the United States population started going down. We did nothing. We just let it go down. What would be bad about that?
I mean, the less jobs are filled.
Okay.
And less people to do work and.
Okay. And so what would we measure that in?
Probably GDP. I mean, the population's pretty big, so it would affect GDP significantly. Initially in my research, I wanted to compare immigration rates to GDP, but there's just so much that goes into that I couldn't see a correlation there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have another question or two? if that happens?
Sure, I'll ask one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put it into words in my head. I kind of want to push Acacia's a little further too, because you offer a lot of really awesome evidence about what other countries are doing in terms of quotas and point systems. But I think that the crises that you identified early on really are with the unskilled labor force. I think the massive pushback of this administration is really on not necessarily the folks that are scoring the points.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
where is, or what is the argument, if this, I don't know, maybe this wasn't really in your research, but what is the argument that we need to have or what might even be some policy ideas for how to satisfy that need that you touched on for unskilled labor that would be part of this reform? And that might also assuage some of the
Mhm.
problems that people are having.
Right. Well, I mean, unskilled labor is like the one place where I see quotas working, but they need to be much more flexible and adjustable than they are now. One of the things that I saw in my research is that U.S. education rates are going up, so they want to do like more higher level jobs. So we actually have a need for unskilled work. Yeah, I think that's what I got from my research mostly.
6.5, almost 7
Okay.
minutes. So
Yeah, we're gonna have to cut it off.
let's cut it.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, so
Okay.